Good morning, good morning. All right, we are on Carthage Conspiracy, Chapter 9, Suppositions Ought Not to Hang Anyone. Last time, we saw how the prosecution's witnesses were very spotty in their memories for some odd reason, considering most of their neighbors, who probably were part of the mob and also wanted the mob to do what they did to Joseph Smith and Hiram, were sitting there with guns in the courtroom, but their spotty memory was enough to let one person sit there and say, well, one of the main defendants wasn't going to stand there and kill a man who was already confined in jail. And letting that slip started this. And then they actually had one major key witness where someone who wasn't part of the mob, why he was part of the mob is a little fuzzy, but he later became a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because of experience at Carthage, where he saw a light of some type leaving Joseph Smith's body shortly after his death. Now, of course, the defense tries to poke holes in all of this by saying, well, see, this booklet is just absolutely fantastical. And that's true. The booklet was fantastical in many regards. But he says, no, that part was not me. That was my friend. Who knows if that's true or not. But at least he was being as clear as possible about what he actually saw while he was in the courtroom. But the defense also tried to say, well, weren't you offered money to give your testimony? And he says, well, yeah, people offered me money, but it doesn't mean that I took it just because people offered it to me. And also the, oh, well, aren't you making money off this booklet or showcasing this painting about what you saw to the church? Did you join the church just to get money? Basically trying to insinuate those things. So it was really good testimony, but that's kind of where we left off. So let's continue from here. Suppositions ought not to hang anyone. Saturday evening and Sunday offered the court participants their first leisure in a week. The extraordinary evening court sessions had disrupted the socializing that normally broke the drudgery for the circuit riders. So a diversion was particularly welcome. The jury was compelled to spend the long, hot, idle hours of Sunday in close confinement under the watchful eye of the deputies, but the judge and lawyers made companionable association in the Hamilton house. The masters at drinking, storytelling, and other merriment were Dick Richardson and Archie Williams. Only Browning and Lambourne remained distant. Lambourne was isolated by the unpopularity of his cause and by his gloomy, foreboding manner. Browning's aloof personality, religious austerity, and abstinence from alcohol kept him from mingling easily with the crowd. Browning passed his Sunday with the Bible. Lambourne spent his with a bottle. I mean, frankly, there is very few good movies or media that depict lawyers that are fighting an uphill battle for the proper or right side of history or what's going on. I hate using the right side of history as a label because it all depends on your point of view, but really it comes down to like true justice and truth. Like Lambourne, I'm not exactly sure of his motivations. I really hope his original speech of, I'm doing this for my own conscience and for, the applause of heaven. I really hope that is his motivation. And yeah, he's got a rough road when everyone else is like, oh yeah, this is going to be so easy, they're going to get off. And it's like, yeah, but a man was murdered by a mob, and a mob of this community. And no one is going to be held accountable for this? No one? I understand why he'd be at his bottle. And Browning, on the other hand, who also Browning defended Joseph Smith while he was alive. So he is a man of principle, and he is doing his best to defend these people, because that's his job. And he's doing a very good job. For a man like Browning, I don't know. I have to hope that, I don't know what it would be like to be a lawyer, defending somebody that you know is guilty, and just, I don't know. Here's the problem is that, for example, if you've ever watched the movie Bridge of Spies, really good show, really, really good show. It's about the lawyer who defended the Russian spy who was found in America in the 1960s, 70s, that kind of thing. Yeah, he was super guilty, right? But his lawyer did everything that he could for them and even continued to push for his rights after he was convicted, and everybody knew it. And he was not a popular man, and it was not fun to be in his shoes. People showed that, and the movie depicts it well. But later on, there's a U-2 plane going over Russia that gets shot down, and the pilot is, of course, tried as a spy and convicted. And the same lawyer who defended the Russian spy is the one who is called in to negotiate the exchange of the gentleman and also other people, because there was a student who was just a student who was in the wrong place at the wrong time and got picked up by the sub-government of the Eastern Germans who wanted to be thought of as independent of Russia. It was really interesting. So he arranges this swap, and it's fascinating. That's one of the few stories I can think of where lawyers are on a very unpopular side, but yet do the right thing. Another one I can think of is Amistad. I think that has John Adams as the lawyer defending the black people from Africa being transported across the Atlantic who survive a storm and showing that they should be free. Again, very unpopular opinion, but great show. I'm trying to think of any others. The only other one I can think of is fictional, which would be To Kill a Mockingbird, where Atticus Finch defends his client in the South, who's black, against allegations of that are unfounded, and he's deals with the consequences of that and how that affects the lives of the children. So it's not purely about the law case. Like, when I look at this, I look how lopsidedly one-sided it is, how horrible the consequences of all these different actions of these different actors are. And yet I still see glimmers of the judge trying to do his best to be a good judge, even though I think he made an absolute horrific ruling based on pragmatism instead of principle. But I think in some ways he was trying to do what was right, when it was also pragmatic. I see Lamborn, not particularly the greatest fellow from his bioptic in this book, but like I say, I really hope his speech about wanting to do it for his own conscience and for the applause of heaven is true. And then it makes me wonder about Browning. I mean, if you're a good defense lawyer, even if they're guilty, you're trying to just help them as best as you can. So I suppose, kind of like in Bridge of Spies, that he's just trying to do his best for the people that's been put under his care, and that's all he should think about. So at the same time, I have to sit here and wonder, how can you morally, I would wonder about this. I think if I were to be a defense lawyer for someone who is as guilty as sin, that I would have to sit there and say, it's not my job. I would really have to partition it. I'd have to sit there and say, it's not my job to make sure that the prosecution does their job properly. It's my job to defend the people as properly as I can, even if they are truly guilty. It does not matter. We just do the best for them. And any of these witnesses who perjure and lie about, oh, I don't remember, oh, I didn't see this, that's going to be on their heads. Because, I mean, think about it. It's literally, it is one of the basic 10 commandments. Thou shalt not bear false witness. This is the major thing it's talking about. Not only is it just, don't lie, like we like to say, It is literally, you don't bear false witness against your neighbor. You don't accuse them of something that they didn't do. You don't not accuse them of things. You get what I'm saying? Just like bear truthful witness. So, yeah, this is a huge conundrum. And this would make a great thing to explore all these different ideas and concepts. The question is, would you do it in a movie or would you do it in a small series, like 2 or 3, hour-long presentations or 4-hour presentations? Because there's so much in here that is just rich with information to explore. So, anyways, the court convened at 7 on Monday morning, but Judge Young had to give initial attention to some civil cases. So it was 9 o'clock before the jury filed into the courtroom and the murder case resumed. 4 prosecution witnesses testified before noon. The first 2 were Thomas L. Barnes, a 35-year-old Carthage physician, and John Wilson, a 49-year-old tavern keeper, who was captain of a ranger company in the militia. These 2 men had been part of a group of 3 or 4 who rode out of Carthage at about 3 o'clock on the day of the murder to maintain a lookout on some high ground about 4 miles north. They were mostly watching in the direction of Nauvoo because, as Barnes told the jury, it was expected that the Mormons would come to rescue the Smiths that evening. From their vantage point, during 3 or 4 hours, they saw several groups of men about a half-mile apart, like distinct companies, coming from Carthage on the road from Warsaw, and then leaving by the same way, which I guess contradicts the testimony of the guard who wouldn't answer whether they, shot blank cartridges on the stand because he wanted to plead the fifth. Did Barnes and Morrison know what that meant? Lamborn asked Wilson. They thought it was a company to exterminate the Mormons, was the witness's significant reply. Lamborn pressed both witnesses as to what they had observed in Carthage before they left at 3. Barnes admitted that he had seen Aldrich, Sharp, and Williams in Carthage at this time, but when Lamborn pursued this subject, he denied seeing any of them, talking to Captain R.F. Smith, or any of the guards at the jail. So they were there, but they just weren't talking to anyone. Lamborn asked whether the witnesses knew of any conspiracy or understanding to kill the Smiths that evening. I may have supposed something, Barnes replied, but my suppositions ought not to hang anyone. The jury was not to hear what Barnes supposed, but it was probably what he revealed many years later when he wrote his daughter that the mob had an understanding with some of the citizens of Carthage who were party to the whole matter. One of the guards later told him that they fired blank cartridges over the heads of the mob. So, like I keep saying, everybody knew what went on. Everybody knew, but no one was willing to say it on the stand. Why? They wanted the murderers off. They wanted the conspirators off. Anyone involved in that mob, because there was plenty more who were part of killing Joseph Smith. Oh, no, it's perfectly fine. It's just awful. Wilson was even more reluctant to testify when Lamborn asked him if he had ever heard any of the defendants say anything about conspiracy to murder the Smiths. Wilson replied, I did not want to hear anything, and I would not have heard it if they wanted to tell me. As if that were not sufficient evidence of his witness's attitude towards the Mormons, Wilson spiced his testimony by referring to the Mormons as hellhounds, and by declaring that he had wanted them exterminated and do yet. I have a really, really hard time considering that this I'm so frustrated because if I were a jurist, there's if my problem is if I were a jurist is that I have an understanding of technicality, but I also have an understanding of reality. The technicality is that, oh, well, here's what truly is presented, here's what's not presented, here's what you have to keep in mind, here's what you have to not keep in mind. I understand there's technicalities of this, but when you see what's in the audience, what's happening to these witnesses who are on the stand, who are just calling Mormons hellhounds, and, oh yeah, I want them exterminated, and still do. How do you not take that into consideration? How do you not open your eyes to reality? Oh, let's see here. Maybe you're one of those people who, as he says, wanted them exterminated and do yet. Maybe you're one of those people on that panel who are like, I agree with this guy. Lamborn got a little helpful as evidence from Thomas Dixon, a 53-year-old Pennsylvania-born farmer from Dallas Township in the northern part of the county. Dixon, who had been a witness before the grand jury, testified that he had seen Thomas Sharp in Carthage at about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning on that day of the murder. That afternoon, he was riding out of Carthage for home. Dixon saw the sun glistening on the guns of a group of men approaching Carthage from the west. He turned back, left his horse at Hamilton's, and ran for the jail. On the way, he saw Colonel Williams walking north across the courthouse square. Arriving at the jail just ahead of the armed mob, Dixon stood at the southeast corner, southeast corner, and saw the same events that other witnesses had described. A few of the guards fired. Some of the attackers wrestled them to the ground, where they lay until after the Smiths were killed. Although the Grays had a shorter distance to march from their tents than Dixon had to run from Hamilton's tavern, they still did not arrive until after the mob departed. So, the mob was in on it, the Grays were in on it, the guards were in on it. When Dixon first saw them, they had halted along the way, some distance from the jail. Dixon told the jury that he knew Aldrich, Davis, Sharp, and Williams by sight. He insisted that he had not seen any of them at the jail. In fact, although he had lived in the county for 10 or 11 years and knew a good many of its citizens, he didn't see anyone he knew at the jail except the guards. Browning's cross-examination of this witness elicited some important testimony on the controverted circumstances involving Joseph Smith's plunge out of the window and his alleged firing squad execution at the well curb. Question: did you see Smith fall out of the window? Yes. Had he been shot before he fell out of the window? He was shot, or hurt some little, for when he first came into the window there was blood on his pantaloons. Did you see him set up against the well curb? I saw him raise up himself against the well curb and die immediately. Did you see 4 men shoot him? No. Did you see anything about a marvelous light? No. Did you see 4 men paralyzed? No. Again, the defense is harping on something that was established as not relevant. All the details of the booklet are not fully relevant. No. Did you occupy a position from which you could see him plainly? He was about 10 steps from me as I stood on the southeast corner of the jail. How long did he hang before he fell? He hung but a short time. What was his position in the window? His head was out, right arm, and one leg. Having been conspicuously unsuccessful in trying to buttress his case from the testimony of witnesses who had been in Carthage around the time of the murder, Lamborn next elected to make another try with a witness from the Warsaw militia, Eli Walker, a well-to-do, middle-aged farmer. Had marched with the militia from Warsaw to the railroad shanties. Lamborn obviously wanted this witness to supply the missing details and precise conversation that took place at the shanties. His hopes were in vain. Despite searching questioning, Eli Walker was unsure or could not recall when questioned about any subject that might have incriminated any of the defendants. In contrast, he had a clear recollection of information that exonerated himself and defendant Davis. Thus, he testified that soon after Colonel Williams read the disbanding order, Captain Davis had called for all that were in favor of going on to Warsaw and eating dinner at the tavern to come on. Walker, Davis, and others thereupon returned to Warsaw. Huh. You know, with how great these witnesses are, I just might think there wasn't a mob. On the potentiality of incriminating subjects, Walker admitted that he had heard some person at the shanties say that he would blow the jail to hell, but he insisted that he didn't know who it was. He said he heard a call made for volunteers, but he couldn't say who made it. He admitted Sharp was at the shanties, but he said he did not recollect hearing him make a speech. He said he might have heard someone speak of going to Carthage, but he couldn't recollect who it was. He admitted that someone spoke to the troops while they were still in the ranks, declaring that those who would go to Carthage should advance some paces in front. But he testified that he couldn't say who said it. He said he heard Colonel Williams say something about raising volunteers, but couldn't recollect whether he was in favor or against it. He testified that he was not prepared to say what number volunteered. Finally, after a series of questions concerning what Colonel Williams had said about volunteering, the frustrated Lamborn asked Walker, "Are you willing to say that you do not recollect anything he said?" "No," the witness replied cagily, "but I do not recollect it sufficiently to state what it was." Really? It was perfectly apparent that Walker knew more than he told. His unwillingness to incriminate his fellow citizens is apparent in his sworn testimony that it would be impossible for me to tell what I heard that day. The farmer had been more than a match for Lamborn, who gave up in disgust. There was no cross-examination. Yeah, it's why cross-examine when everyone's on your side? When court resumed at 2 o'clock, Lamborn called his second key witness of the trial. His morning witness had provided the very little helpful testimony, their principal effect being to reinforce the impression that many responsible Hancock citizens who had not participated in the murder were nevertheless involved to the extent of being unwilling to give testimony against those who had. The prosecution could not afford to have the jury further infected by that impression, and Lamborn sought to counteract it with the testimony of a witness who had not appeared before the grand jury. Jeez Louise. You know, all these people just don't want to convict their fellow members. Like, why? Why in the world would that be persuasive? Oh, because if you're on the jury and your friends know you, and everyone here wants these murderers off, then are you going to, as a jurist, start thinking pragmatically? Oh, well, let's see here. Everyone and their guns in the audience want these people off. Everyone knows more than what they're saying, and it's really obvious. And yet, I have to live with these people after this jury, so... Eliza Jane Graham was a 35-year-old Mormon from Nauvoo. Her appearance was a surprise to many. Lamborn himself had become aware of her knowledge of events only a few days before. As the defense and the crowd regarded Eliza with apprehension and hostility, this lone Mormon woman probably looked on them with a fear bordering on panic. Lamborn must have done his best to put her at ease, inviting her to ignore the courtroom crowd and speak directly to the jury. In response to Lamborn's encouragement, Miss Graham told the jury about her employment in the Warsaw House, a tavern then being managed by a Mrs. Fleming, her aunt. Just before dark on the day the Smiths were murdered, Thomas Sharp and James Gregg arrived at the tavern in a two-horse carriage. Sharp came into the hallway and asked for a glass of water. He said he had come from Carthage in less than an hour, and he was very dry. Miss Fleming met him in the hall and asked him how they came on at Carthage. Lambourne directed the witnesses to repeat his reply. He said, We've finished the leading men of the Mormon Church. Eliza Graham testified that both Davis and Grover boarded at Fleming's, but neither had been here for supper that evening. At about midnight they came in together, and they said they wanted supper for about 20 men, but before the last of the men served, there were about 60. She said that all talked openly about the events of the day. Lambourne asked her to relate their conversation to the jury. Someone said he had killed old Joe, Eliza replied, but another man insisted that he had killed him. She testified that she heard Grover say he had killed old Joe, and Davis say that they had finished the men. It was a general talk amongst the crowd that they had killed the Smiths. All around the house the men were rejoicing and bragging about their work. At about 2 in the morning, some of the men went upstairs to bed, and others stood guard. Oh, yeah, and that tavern keeper, he doesn't recall. No one talked about that kind of stuff. Eliza testified that she had seen 2 injured men that evening, one wounded slightly on the cheek, the other in the arm. The one with the face wound was a youth of 14 or 15, whom she did not know. The man with the wound on his arm was brought into the kitchen by Grover, who got Mrs. Fleming's permission for him to sit by the stove for about an hour. Eliza said his name was William Vorass, and that he lived at Bear Creek. She said she did not hear anyone say how he came to be wounded. Lambourne was obviously well pleased with this testimony. To drive it home to the jury, he concluded his direct examination by having Eliza repeat the parts that had been most incriminating of the defendants, Sharp, Davis, and Grover. In response, she testified that Davis and Sharp had said, "We have finished leading the men of the Mormon Church." And Grover and all the rest talked in the same way. We have finished the leading men of the Mormon Church. Okay. Eliza Graham's testimony was seriously incriminating of Sharp and Grover. It was the first evidence of any sort against Davis. Consequently, it is not surprising that Browning conducted a lengthy cross-examination for the defense. Browning saw all women on a pedestal. As he approached, that's an interesting statement. Browning saw all women on a pedestal. So is this his religious convictions coming into play? As he approached the awkward task of publicly challenging Eliza Graham's testimony, he may have thought it of his own beloved Eliza, tall and portly. Browning's Kentucky-born Eliza was not a beautiful woman, but she was an intelligent, cultivated person who enjoyed life, won friends easily, and made him an ideal wife. Like some other Southern women of this period, Browning's Eliza enjoyed puffing on a pipe and drinking mint slings, in striking contrast to her Puritan husband. But Browning was devoted to his wife, and he wrote to her with the deepest affection at each separation. I always look at Browning, I think he's such a great guy. I just find it so sad that he's needing to defend people that are just awful, but he's doing his job well, so... Browning's initial questions gave Graham an opportunity to testify that she supposed Sharp referred to killing the Smiths because the Smiths were the leading men in the Mormon Church. She had often heard Sharp threaten that he would kill the Smiths, most recently that morning at Fleming's before he started for Carthage in his carriage. Next, he secured her admission that Sharp lived almost across the street from Fleming's, and that as he came from Carthage, he had to pass his own home to get to the tavern. Eliza seemed unaware that this part of Browning's cross-examination was inviting the jury to consider the improbability of Sharp's driving his carriage past his own home to the tavern for no apparent purpose other than to ask for a drink of water and then make an incriminating admission. How is that improbable when, hey, he just finished off everybody and he's going to have party arrive? Really? Really? It's, oh, just because it's really damning testimony, well, we can't believe it because he was preparing for the party of everyone coming after him, but that's really improbable that he would, drive past his own home to prepare for everyone coming. Browning next turned to the witness's testimony regarding Davis and Grover. Eliza said about half of the men in the dining room were claiming to have killed the Smiths. One would say, I killed old Joe, and another would say, no, you did not, I did. But despite the fact that most of these men lived in Warsaw and the vicinity, Eliza claimed she did not recall the name of a single person who said, he killed old Joe except Grover. What about Davis? When Davis arrived, he said, we have finished the men. Why had she paid such close attention to what these two said? Because I had no idea they would have done any such thing, Eliza replied. But then she was quickly forced to admit that she didn't think the others would have done it either. In truth, the witness could not give a sufficient reason why she had paid such close attention to the statements of the defendants. With this line of questioning, Brown made this part of the witness's testimony seem like a recent fabrication. The problem is that you're astonished by the people who are saying, oh, yay, I killed the Smiths. But then you get to see their faces. You get to see who they are. You may actually know who they are. And especially when they get arrested and indicted, it's like, yeah, I know those men. I saw them say and do that. It's just infuriating that sometimes I'm really infuriated with how the courtroom works. Because maybe, I don't know. I'm in this weird situation where the longer I live, the more that I realize, apparently, not everyone thinks the same way that I do. Like, when there was that viral article several months back, if not a year or two back, where it was, people suddenly realized that the way people imagine things is different. Like, if you sit there and say, imagine an apple, just with as much detail as you can, and then you give someone a picture of different arrangements of what an apple looks like. You have one that's like red and glossy with water dripping off of it and full of detail. Then you have one that's a little more basic, that is just kind of a red apple, kind of symbolic. One that just doesn't have color, that it's the outline of the apple. And then there's someone that just doesn't picture anything. That there are people along that spectrum of able imagination. And so the reason I bring this up is because if I were a witness, I would be able to tell people how my mind works on certain things. Why do I remember these people? Well, specifically, I remember these people because not only did I actually see them and saw them say these things and recall them saying these things, and I was astonished at their behavior, I was astonished at all these men's behavior, but it was cemented even further by the fact that these were the men who were indicted, and I knew that I knew what they had said. And it cannot undo the fact that they did this. And to imply that it's a recent fabrication is of the utmost horrid type of questioning that could occur. And just repugnant to my senses. But I'm different, apparently. I don't know if people are cognizant of how they work and why. Because the problem is, like I've alluded to earlier, when you have multiple witnesses to one thing, you get different outcomes. And obviously we're seeing it here, but the reason why for most of these people is you can tell that they're covering their butt because they don't want to be on the bad side of everyone there with guns, or they actually flat out support the idea of murdering people. And so they don't want to implicate themselves. Oh, I can't recall if we heard this. I can't recall if I saw them there actually saying what everyone else knows that they said. Oh, because, yeah, Joe over there on the, or Bill over there on the jury, yeah, he was right there hearing the same thing I did, but, I never saw anything. Yeah, no, can't recall it. Oh, this person completely heard it clearly. There was no fog or anything like that. and he has the actual cojones to testify. But you don't. Okay, sure, fine. Got it. Yeah, and when you talk about this same thing to your friends and family later on, you'll just spill the truth, but just outside the courtroom. Because, you know 3 or 4 people on the jury, but the rest of them, maybe not. You're not so sure, but everyone's kind of like that. So, but the problem is, if you just have a regular accident, how truthful are people? Because often they skip the way their mind works, the actual things that are going on, and they go straight to their suppositions of what happened, instead of saying the sequence of events of which something occurred, which they have witnessed in order, and why they saw what they saw or heard what they heard. They just skip to, well, I saw the car crash. Well, no, the car crash happened behind me. I heard squealing tires. I heard the crunching of metal. I turned around. It was obstructed by some trees, so I ran down further. Then I saw the accident after it had completed. There was still some rocking of the cars as they were settling from the crash, because I got there as soon as I could. But it was basically done and nothing was moving after that point. That level of detail, not many people say. They just say, oh yeah, I heard some squeal of tires, it turned around and I saw the crash, and so I saw the crash happen. When it's like, no, you really didn't. You saw the after effects of it. They just skip ahead. So this what frustrates me so bad. At the same time, any lawyer out there is probably going, yeah, but you have to understand that because people aren't like you have to do this cross-examination stuff, and yes, you have to limit how they witness things, and yes, you have to cast doubt on it because that's your job. Browning's next tactic was to draw from the witness's own lips an admission that she had earlier confessed that she knew nothing about the case. After close questioning, Eliza acknowledged that she had made such a statement at Quincy, but she denied that she said this in the presence of Warren and Reynolds. She explained her later denials on the basis that I always denied it while I was in Warsaw because I was afraid of being called as a witness. I always denied it because I was afraid of being killed. Because the same men who killed the Smiths are the same men who are in this courtroom now, and are the same men occupying the seats here, and are the same men in the jury box, and are the same men who are willing to kill me right now for giving testimony. Yeah, you want me to say that? Well, they're still out there free because they were never arrested? Yeah, when they still have bloodlust in their eyes and that, someone could convict me? Yeah, that's a real great idea. Probing further, Browning asked her who had heard her denial in Warsaw. Flustered, under close questioning, she replied, I did not deny it to anyone in Warsaw because the question was never asked me, and I had no occasion to deny it. As he drew towards the close of his cross-examination, Browning bore down harder on the witness. His questions jumped back and forth across the details of her testimony, probing for inconsistencies or improbable or embarrassing circumstances. He also sought to capitalize on the fact that the witness was a Mormon. Oh, yes. Let's not forget. She's a Mormon. We can't believe those people. Yeah, they were the ones who we want to kill. So why should we believe the people we want to kill, right? Right? Implying that her willingness to testify and her incriminating recollections about Davis and Grover were prompted by her associations in Nauvoo. Despite her fatigue and fear, however, Eliza held her ground. She testified that about 6 weeks after the murder, she went to live with her parents in Nauvoo, where she had resided since that time. She admitted that she had stopped denying any knowledge about the killing when she went to live in Nauvoo, explaining that this was because she had no further idea she would be called as a witness. She had not heard she was to be a witness until last Wednesday. Since that time, she had discussed her testimony only with Lamborn, hoping to catch the prosecutor in some impropriety. To the preparation of the witness, Browning asked her what the gentleman had told her. He told me to tell the truth, the witness responded, and to tell all that I knew about it. Having gotten nowhere with that line of questioning, Browning came to his final point of inquiry, the witness's membership in the Mormon Church. Yes, let's not forget that. Let's drive that one home. Yes, she was a member, having joined the church about 5 years ago. No, she did not know Littlefield, Judge Phelps, Mr. Taylor, Brigham Young, or any of the 12, except by sight. And she had no conversations with them about the case. She knew the widows of Joseph and Hiram Smith by sight, but was not acquainted with either of them. Apparently, unable to make anything favorable out of this testimony, Browning announced that he had no further questions. The ordeal of Eliza Jane Graham was over, and she stepped down from the witness stand. Was it over, or was it about to start? Go. Eliza Graham's testimony had given the participants much to ponder. If believed, the admissions of Sharp, Grover, and Davis were highly incriminatory. Yeah, if they're believed. Or maybe she is believed, but they don't care. The cross-examination had cast doubt on the credibility of the witnesses' selective recollection of Davis and Grover statements and the probability of Sharp's admission, and the testimony had at least placed these three defendants among the group of men who were bragging that they had killed the Smiths, a point upon which Lamborn might build a case with the help of subsequent testimony. It was 4:15 p.m. when Miss Graham concluded her testimony. Some judges would have found that a convenient time to adjourn for the day, but this lengthy trial had already used more than its share of the 12 days of court time which the Fifth Circuit allotted to the spring term in Hancock County. Despite the heat and inevitable restlessness of the courtroom crowd, Judge Young signaled for Lamborn to call his next witness. If any spectator was hoping for brevity, as he sat cramped on the hard wooden benches, he was to be disappointed. The next witness was the third of Lamborn's key witnesses, and his testimony was not to conclude until 4 hours later, well into the evening. Lamborn's final witness on this second day of trial was Benjamin Brackenbury, an 18-year-old who had driven a baggage wagon with Captain Davis's company of Warsaw Militia. Though not a Mormon himself, Brackenbury lived in Nauvoo with his mother and stepfather, Jabez Durfee, who were Mormons. Like Daniels, this young man was well known to everyone in the courtroom. His alleged perjury in his testimony to the grand jury had touched off his pretrial arrest and release on habeas corpus amid charges that the defense was trying to intimidate or kill him. The grand jury had recently refused to indict him for perjury. Now, he would serve as the last key witness for the prosecution. So here he is, Brackenbury himself. Lamborn's first few questions caused Brackenbury to relate the now familiar details about how three companies of militia, Davis's, Grover's, and the third from Green Plains, had been disbanded at the railroad shanties after their morning march from Warsaw. All 5 of the defendants were present at this time. Unlike some of the other witnesses, however, Brackenbury testified that he had not heard any of the speeches and that he had heard nothing about the killing of the Smiths. Brackenbury said Grover had called for volunteers to go to Carthage to see the governor? The Gov, to ask him why he had dismissed the men with public arms in their hands. Some of the troops then returned to Warsaw, but Brackenbury and the others came on toward Carthage. Someone told the witnesses they were going to take the Smiths to Missouri and hang them, which was the first he knew that the group had any such object in view. A man in a Carthage gray uniform met the group on the way to Carthage and gave Aldrich a letter. After Aldrich read the letter, he instructed the troops to spread out a little apart as they went into the town. Like Daniels, Brackenbury next related how the troops turned off the road into the timber about 3 or 4 miles from Carthage, apparently seeking cover for their final approach to the town. The baggage wagons, including Brackenbury's, continued on the road. Brackenbury said he saw Aldrich, Grover, Sharp, and Williams at the point where the troops left the wagons. Lamborn inquired whether he had seen Davis in or near Carthage, probably knowing that Brackenbury was going to add some significance to evidence linking Davis with the crime. Yes, the witness responded. When he was within half a mile of the jail, Davis and several other men overtook and passed him in a lumber wagon. Brackenbury continued on until he was about a quarter mile southwest of the jail, where he remained in his wagon during the shooting. So, he may not have wanted to kill him in jail, but he was right there. The men who came back from the jail were running. They said they had killed the Smiths, Brackenbury told the jury. The first one he heard was a man named Grigg from Warsaw. Lamborn asked if Grover was among them. Yes. Did he say anything? Yes, he had killed Smith. That Smith was a damned stout man, that he had went into the room where Smith was, and that Smith had struck him twice in the face. Grover said he was the first man that went into the house. The group then made their way back toward Warsaw. On the way, Brackenbury saw Wills, Voris, and Gallagher. Voris was wounded in the shoulder, Wills in the arm, and Gallagher in the face, in the cheek, like as if a ball had taken the skin off. He also saw Aldrich, Sharp, and Williams, who passed his wagon on horseback about half a mile west of Carthage. He didn't hear them say anything about the event. When he arrived in Warsaw, some of the group had gotten there first and were crowded around the Warsaw house. Others were still coming. Obviously satisfied, Lamborn elected to terminate his direct examination. Brackenbury's testimony was of great importance. He was the first witness to place defendant Davis in the vicinity of the jail. He had corroborated Daniels's testimony about Aldrich and Carthage-bound mob receiving a message from the Carthage Greys. And he had also corroborated Daniels's statement that Grover was a direct participant in the shooting. He had reinforced earlier testimony about the identity of the mob by tracing them from Warsaw to the shanties, to the Carthage jail, and thence back to Warsaw, showing also that defendants Aldrich, Sharp, and Williams, who accompanied the troops to Carthage, had returned with them. Finally, he had corroborated Eliza Graham's testimony about the mob's return to Warsaw House and the men who were wounded on shoulder, arm, and face. Browning's lengthy cross-examination of this witness was a mixture of success and failure. His attempt to shake the content of Brackenbury's testimony was unsuccessful, resulting only in the addition of vivid details to the incriminating evidence against the defendants. But his attack upon Brackenbury's personal credibility was effective in raising doubts, and he also laid a foundation for later impeachment. I can't take on his witness, but I can take on him. Jeez. One of Browning's first questions backfired, producing additional incriminatory evidence on some important subjects in apparent effort to have Brackenbury contradict Daniels. Browning asked whether Aldrich read the Carthage Greys' note to the men. No, Brackenbury responded, but the messenger had spoken to the men. Now is the time to rush on, he said. The governor is gone to Nauvoo, and there is nobody in Carthage but what you can put dependence in. Though apparently caught off guard by this unsuspected corroboration of the conspiracy, Browning was nevertheless able to draw the force of the testimony somewhat by getting Brackenbury to admit that he was about 50 yards away when this was said in a conversational tone, and that he would not recognize the Grey if he saw him again. Okay. I mean, seriously. Okay, so we've got the initial guy who seems like he embellishes a bit. I think there are things about it that he saw that decided to make him a member of the church. But, oh my gosh, how much can you pile up showing that this is happening, but then just say, no, this didn't happen at all. Especially when these people's lives are at stake and they're willing to testify. Brackenbury next made a damaging concession. Under Browning's persistent questioning, he admitted, I had something to drink that day and had taken enough to make me feel nice. Browning returned and exploited the subject a few minutes later, when the witness explained that he could not recall how one of the defendants was dressed on that day. Brackenbury admitted that my recollection is not very distinct of the events of that day, and I should have remembered things better if I had not felt so nice. Okay, so what did you eat on January 7th of 2024? What did you eat? Why don't you recall that? What did you wear that day? Why don't you recall that? He's the defense. He's the defense. He's the defense. I have to remind myself he's doing his job. Well, thanks for the comfort, little Mau Mau. You're kind of in the way, kiddo. There we go. I know you want to rub on the book, but just a second. All right. Browning scored a temporary advantage by getting Brackenbury to admit that he had not seen Grover go to the jail, but young witness soon incriminated Grover anyway by testifying that he did see a man at the jail who appeared to be hunting something, and when Grover came up to his wagon, he said it was him hunting his gun, a double-barrel shotgun. Browning also erred by giving the witness sufficient latitude to incriminate Grover further with his testimony. When Grover got into my wagon, he was talking to Mr. Williams about killing the Smiths. Grover told someone in the wagon that he was the first man who went into the jail and that Joe Smith struck him twice in the face. Again, Browning partially discredited this testimony by having the witness admit that it was strange that Smith, who had been armed with a pistol, would strike Grover in the face instead of shooting him. Why? How hard is that? It's a struggle. He's trying to shoot out the door. He's trying to do anything that he can to stop people shooting, who shot his brother through the door, coming in, who shot John Taylor several times, and then himself. The cross-examination was successful in exonerating Davis from the incriminating evidence of the earlier direct examination. Under Browning's questioning, Blackberry explained that the wagon with Davis and 5 or 6 others that passed him in sight of the jail did not go to the jail at all, but stopped a few short ways. Browning's cross-examination also included a number of leading questions about whether the witness had made various statements to the grand jury, an obvious foundation for later impeachment. Brackenbury denied telling the grand jury that the messenger from the Carthage Grays had taken Colonel Williams and Henry Stevens to one side and spoken to them, denied saying that he saw Colonel Williams sitting on his horse at the jail during the entire time the men were there, and denied saying that Sharp had said he had passed his wagon, that the Smiths were dead, for he had hold of one of them. Browning now inquired about the witness's personal life. Brackenbury said that he had resided in Nauvoo for 6 years. What business did he follow? Loafering? The witness answered. How long had he done that? Browning inquired, obviously enjoying the effect these answers would have on the jury of hard-working farmers. The most of this winter, he replied. When did he commence that trade? A little before last court here. Browning clinched this effort by leading the witness into admitting that he had boarded at Mr. Deming's at the last term of court and did not know who paid for his board, thus raising a question in the jury's mind as to whether Brackenbury had been paid for his testimony. Browning concluded his cross-examination by asking the witnesses whether he had ever said that he would leave Nauvoo if they did not feed and clothe him. He denied this, but admitted that he did complain of their treating Daniels better than me. Satisfied that he could not end on a more favorable note, Browning announced that he had no further questions and sank wearily into his chair. Apparently attempting to rehabilitate his witness from the discrediting effect of the last series of replies, Lambourne conducted a brief redirect examination. Although Brackenbury admitted that he did not know who paid for his board at Deming's, he solemnly testified that I was never offered or paid anything for swearing here. The witness was then allowed to step down. It was 8:30 p.m. after cautioning that the jury should again be kept separate. Judge Young adjourned the court until 7 Tuesday morning. Though it would not be announced formally until an hour after the court convened Tuesday morning, the jury had now heard virtually all of the prosecution's case. All that remained was the brief reappearance of 2 previous witnesses. Canfield Hamilton came back at his own request to correct an inadvertent but minor error in a date cited in his prior testimony. While he was on the witness stand, Lambourne got him to admit that he thought he had seen Sharp in conversation with Governor Ford in Carthage on the morning the day the Smiths were killed. Lambourne next called Franklin Worrell for his third appearance on the witness stand. Browning again opposed, but the judge allowed the testimony after Lambourne pleaded that he had been disappointed in the getting of his witnesses. Under questioning, Worrell testified that he thought he saw Sharp in Carthage about 8 in the morning on the day the Saints were killed, but he denied knowing anything about Carthage Gray or any Carthage Gray or anyone else being sent out as a messenger that day. When Worrell stepped down from the witness stand at 8:15 Tuesday morning, Lamborn announced that he had no further witnesses. The prosecution's case was over, and Judge Young declared a 1-hour adjournment. Here was a time for judge and jury to reflect on the strengths and weaknesses of the prosecution's case. If they even did that, but sorry, I'm really embittered, aren't I? If the case had gone to the jury at this point, and if the jury believed the prosecution witnesses, there was sufficient evidence to convict Aldrich, Grover, Sharp, and Williams, but not Davis. Concerning the first count of the indictment, which charged that each of the defendants had personally shot Joseph, there was no evidence whatever that Aldrich, Davis, Sharp, or Williams had fired a gun at the jail. But there was evidence of Grover's guilt under this count. Daniels and Brackenbury had seen him at the jail with a gun. Brackenbury quoted him as admitting immediately after the shooting that he was the first man that went into the house, and that he had killed Smith. Graham corroborated the later admission. All of the defendants, except Davis, could be found guilty of murder on the second count, which charged that the person or persons who shot Joseph Smith did so pursuant to a conspiracy or common design in which each of these defendants had participated. The mosaic of conspiracy was assembled in sufficient clarity to include Aldrich, Grover, Sharp, and Williams in the picture. The mob that killed Joseph and Hiram Smith had been traced from the militia bivouac outside Warsaw, north to where they were dismissed at the railroad shanties, east across the prairie to Carthage, then back to Warsaw where they took their midnight supper at Warsaw House. Williams, Aldrich, and Grover commanded various units in this militia. Numerous witnesses agreed that these three and Sharp were present when the disbanding order was read, and that about 100 of the disbanded militiamen were then persuaded to go to Carthage rather than return to their homes in and around Warsaw. Peyton and Walker testified that Aldrich and Williams called for volunteers to go to Carthage. Sharp, who had been in Carthage that morning, according to Dixon, Worrell, and Hamilton, had joined the troops by this time. Peyton Walker and several other witnesses testified that Sharp gave a speech in the favor of going to Carthage. Daniels said that Sharp spoke of the necessity of killing the Smiths. Other witnesses were less specific on the subject, but several agreed that he sought to arouse the troops and send them to Carthage. Even some witnesses who were evasive on the exact purpose of the proposed 10-mile walk to Carthage agreed that it was associated with the mob's grievances against the Mormons and their hatred of Joseph Smith. Daniels said that Captain Grover was the first to volunteer, and that he would go alone if no one else would. Numerous witnesses agreed about 100 men started for Carthage, including Aldrich, Grover, Sharp, and Williams. Several witnesses saw them in Carthage around 3 o'clock, and just before and just after the 5 o'clock shooting at the jail, there was little evidence of what these leaders actually did in Carthage prior to the mob's arrival at the jail, except as could be inferred in the circumstances. Daniels and Brackenbury both testified that a man was in uniform of the Carthage Greys, met the mob about 4 miles west of Carthage, and gave them a message that this was a good time to murder the Smiths, since all was arranged and the guards would not resist. Aldrich was present with the militiamen when the message was read, and the other 3 defendants were also seen there about this time. Okay, also so right now, the book is basically walking you through all the people and all the witnesses showing how they had corroborated, worked together, had this conspiracy to kill the Smiths, how the leaders were involved, who was going there, and who was doing this. Here's the recollection of the whole thing. And there's a small part of this that even I have questions on. Governor Ford was apparently at Carthage that morning, talked with Sharp, the person who is part of indicted here, the one who is the printer, who just is awful in almost every regard. And he also wanted, the governor killed. My question is how much did the governor know? Did Governor Ford know that the guards were going to be firing blanks? Did he tell them that he was going up to Nauvoo to try and broker peace, and so Sharp just took advantage of that? Or was Governor Ford part of that, saying, do what you got to do because you have a little bit of time, and I'm going to try and placate them and make sure they don't come? I mean, what is it? To me, Governor Ford is almost like, there's so many different depictions of someone like Pontius Pilate, at Jesus Christ's crucifixion. I've seen people who show Pontius Pilate as, I really don't want to have anything to do with this. I have other depictions of Pontius Pilate where I've seen him basically trying to be like a sly snake and just be like, oh, really? Really? And all his questions, just really slimy in his depiction. Like, they keep it accurate to what's in the New Testament, but they try and make him seem really slimy and like he had no regard for Jesus's life, and then crucify him. I've got a pragmatist that I've heard who basically, is like, how in the world would anyone have the conversation between Pilate and Jesus that's up there? Because unless they were tagging along, which they wouldn't have been, how are they going to know this? And since Pontius Pilate was deposed from being at his position because he was so bloodthirsty about how he punished people, that it was causing more problems by him being such a hard fist, it's like, why isn't it that the Romans, why not just say that Pontius Pilate is the one who crucified Jesus for being called a king, which would have been rebellion at the time? So there's a huge swing on how Pontius Pilate is depicted. And I look at this book, and I look at everything that's talked about with Governor Ford, and I can't tell. There's part of me that says, if Governor Ford was an honest actor, that he was probably trying to do his best in a bad situation, but trying to navigate the politics of it as well. And then when things went south, he was again like, oh my gosh, he was supposed to be under my care and he got killed. And now I have to come after these people, and he just botches everything along the way. And that way it's politically great for the Whigs, who a lot of them are part of the anti-Mormon crowd. So for him, it's kind of like all politics and trying to do what's right vaguely. On the other hand, you could easily try and start throwing shade at him, just like Pontius Pilate. You could throw shade at him that he was in on it too. He's like, yeah, I don't like these Mormons, but they trust the Democrat Party, so we're going to, let's get him down here, get this taken care of. I'm going to go up there. I'm trying to just take care of it as fast as you can, because I don't want these guys around as much as you do, but they still support me, so let's get this taken care of. And then the Whigs are like, oh, well, we can take care of this opportunity. You could really turn Governor Ford into just a dastardly person. So here, this is, with the recounting of everything that happened, to me it becomes very plain that all the leaders were involved. Even Davis was involved. Even though he didn't want to be there when Joseph Smith was killed, it sounds like he was at least there, and he was help planning and inciting people to it, or at least trying to incite people to go and kill Mormons up in Nauvoo. Oh, I don't mind having a fair fight, but just killing someone who's already, like fish in a barrel, no, that's not sporting. Let's go after the ones that are out there still. Really? Really? You'd rather attack Nauvoo than Joseph Smith and Hiram in Carthage? How awful. Just how awful. Let's continue. During the shooting, 2 witnesses saw Grover at the jail with a gun. Williams was also there, according to several witnesses, but he was standing by observing the scene, though Daniels said that he shouted orders to the attackers. The sentries at the jail were totally ineffectual. When the shooting commenced, the reserve companies of the guard marched deliberately to the jail some 700 yards, arriving after the mob departed. They made no pursuit. After the shooting, the men ran past Brackenbury's wagon, saying they had killed the Smiths. He heard Grover brag he had killed Smith. That night, in Warsaw, Eliza Graham heard Sharp say, We have finished the leading men of the Mormon Church. The wounded men whom Brackenbury saw coming from the jail came back to Warsaw House, where, according to Eliza, Grover was caring for one of them. The midnight supper, Eliza heard members of the group, including Grover, bragging about killing the Smiths. The mob had not acted spontaneously, Aldrich, Grover, Sharp, and Williams were the acknowledged leaders of these men, a leadership confirmed as to this specific deed by the speeches and actions at the railroad shanties, which had aroused the disbanded militiamen and sent them toward Carthage jail. Sharp's presence in Carthage that morning, his appearance at the shanties, where the troops were disbanded, his return to Carthage with the other leaders, the timely message to Aldrich from the Carthage Greys, and the subsequent behavior of the jail guards and the larger contingent of Carthage Greys suggest that Sharp and Williams were in Carthage preparing the way for the mob. Sharp's admission that the evening at the Warsaw House confirms this interpretation. Although there was probably sufficient evidence to convict 4 defendants at the conclusion of the prosecution's case, the 3 key prosecution witnesses had been somewhat discredited by the cross-examination, and there was promise of a thoroughgoing impeachment effort during the presentation of the defense. The prosecution's case was insecure, and more evidence would obviously have been desirable. Why didn't the prosecution provide more evidence? There was nothing in Josiah Lamborn's style to lead one to conclude that he was a merciful, indifferent, or indolent prosecutor. He was not backward when it came to pouring in all the evidence at his command. His tendency was rather to err on the side of excessive zeal or even downright unscrupulousness. These tendencies had been evident in a celebrated trial in Springfield in which Lamborn prosecuted 2 brothers named Traylor for the murder of an old man named Fisher. Although Fisher's body had not been found, he was generally believed to be dead. When last seen, he was in the company of the Traylors. In a private conference, Lamborn convinced one of the Traylors, who was said to be somewhat weak-minded, that the only way to save his life was to make a full confession. He did so, giving the particulars of a killing and subsequent robbery. Using this confession, a wealth of other circumstantial evidence, Lamborn built a case that pointed unmistakably to the conclusion that the defendants had murdered the missing man. Even though the Traylors had previously been regarded as good and reputable men, the citizens of Springfield were persuaded of their guilt. As Lamborn's vindictive denunciation of the defendants concluded, it appeared that he had his victory and that the Traylors would hang. At the dramatic moment, the defense counsel E.D. Baker and Stephen T. Logan announced that the defense would have but one witness. The door to the courtroom opened, and in walked Fisher, the supposed victim. See, this still happens today. Get a confession out of someone, even if they didn't do it. Tell them that's the only way you can save yourself, your family, your friends, your members. But the crowd's angry reaction against Lamborn was almost uncontrollable, and if it had not been for the saving efforts of Baker and Logan, Lamborn might have been lynched on the spot. So, they're bringing up a good question. So why didn't Lamborn pour on more evidence? It would obviously have been desirable for the Lamborns to have more witnesses and to have drawn out and exploited his witnesses' testimony more effectively. Nevertheless, the prosecutor's preparation may have met the standards of that day. At least as related to routine criminal cases. Abraham Lincoln, one of the most successful Illinois trial lawyers of the period, apparently did not go over his witnesses' testimony before putting them on the stand. In fact, he is said to have gone into his trials without any advanced preparation. This pattern of spontaneous rather than advanced trial preparation was probably a consequence of the circuit system, in which lawyers often had to be engaged and cases put to trial within a few hours after the legal caravan rode into the county seat. In contrast, 3 successive prosecutors, McConnell, Elliott, and Lamborn, had spent almost a year seeking to locate and assure the appearance of prosecution witnesses in this case. It is possible to identify additional evidence that the prosecution could have used to strengthen the case. In addition to the public in the Warsaw Signal, Thomas Sharp had defended the murders committed 2 weeks earlier as a justifiable execution that had been advocated by some of our most respectable citizens. Sharp wrote that our citizens have regretted and still regret the necessity that existed for taking the law, in this particular instance, into their hands. But he argued that this course was inevitable, and the only question was as to the proper time. It was inevitable. I I couldn't decide if I was reading it right or wrong, so it was inevitable and only a question as to the proper time. Apparently, including himself among those responsible for the decision, Sharp reviewed the anti-Mormon grievances against the Mormon leaders and asked, quote, "Should we have laid down quietly and suffer the tyrant to rivet the chains that he had already galled us to madness? No man through whose veins courses one drop of that noble blood which prompted our forefathers to throw off the yoke of British oppression will ask his fellow freemen to kneel at the nod of any tyrant, nor condemn him for asserting his liberty, even if in so doing he is obliged to commit a daring violation of the law." Unquote. Oh my gosh. The projection of these people. Seriously. You know, they're such tyrants. Just asking to have religious freedom. Actually being the ones to, like, not roll over and take it up the tailpipe. God, these people are such tyrants. They want to actually, have their rights supported? Oh, but they'll be the group in charge then. And when they're the group in charge, then we won't have rights. But, just because that's the law. There was no charge here that the act was done by the Missourians. Referring to the reports that all the troops had been disbanded except 4 small companies, Sharp wrote, "It is certain that these troops were highly dissatisfied, that they thought the governor had trifled with them, that they thought furthermore that the evils under which they were laboring had not been reached, and could only be removed in one of 2 ways, either by expelling the body of the Mormons or by cutting off their leaders." Asserting general agreement that the Smiths deserved death, Sharp declared that the only questions were as to the appropriateness of the time and manner. Reminding his readers of the likelihood that the Mormon leaders would otherwise have escaped any penalty, Sharp concluded, "We pled the necessity of the case." Such implied and expressed admissions further implicated Sharp at least, and could also have been used to reinforce the prosecution's other evidence of conspiracy. In addition, there were other witnesses who might have provided valuable testimony for the prosecution. Foremost among them were Worrell's fellow guards at the jail, but in most instances, the additional prosecution witnesses may have been available as a practical matter. For instance, subpoenas were out for Levi Street and William Baldwin, and who were among the guards at the jail, but deputies reported that they were unable to locate them. We know nothing of the 3 or 4 other jail guards whom Lamborn neglected to have Worrell identify. Also sought as his witness were John Morrison, Warsaw militiaman, William Hook, Henry Stevens, a Warsaw lawyer who was the adjutant of Mayor Aldrich's Warsaw Battalion. Writs of the attachment were issued for these 3 men, but none could be found. Henry Matthias, or Matthews, who had willingly given important testimony before the grand jury in October, was arrested on May 21st on a writ of attachment issued in December, but as already indicated, he was not brought into the court as a witness because the deputy reported he resisted with a deadly weapon and thus escaped my custody. Yeah, he didn't want to be killed. The list of attachments issued in December also included the name of John Taylor, who had originally signed the criminal complaint upon which this prosecution was based. He was never served because he and other Mormon leaders hid from the deputies who were trying to arrest and take them to Carthage to testify, so they too could be shot like fish in a barrel. Mormon records contain the name of at least 1 witness who was willing to testify about the events at the jail, but he apparently was not called. Okay, I understand Lamborn was hampered a lot by everyone wanting to run because they didn't want the same perforations put into them. In the months preceding the trial, the prosecution's attachment and subpoenas had gone out across the state, and many were successful. During the winter, Governor Ford was served with a subpoena in Springfield, and William Daniels received one in Quincy. Lamborn had the court issued other subpoenas or attachments after he arrived in Carthage just before the trial. Jonas Hobart and Thomas Dixon were among the witnesses arrested on writ of attachment who appeared either in custody or under bond given to secure their appearance. Over a dozen other potential witnesses, such as George W. Thatcher, Thomas Morrison, and Robert F. Smith, were served with prosecution subpoenas, but were never called to the witness stand. In review of the intringens intransigence of other Hancock County citizens, whom Lamborn did bring before the jury, it is easy to imagine why he chose not to hear the testimony of such notorious anti-Mormons as these. He probably figured they'd just screw him. Ugh. Of course, there were yet in the county many uncommitted non-Mormons. During the Mormon War that erupted a few months after the trial, there were non-Mormons of courage and objectivity who tried to stand between the warring parties and restore order in the county. Some of these people must have known facts that would have helped strengthen the prosecution, but the prosecution had obtained little helpful evidence when it had succeeded in locating such witnesses and calling them to the stand. George and Eli Walker, Thomas Barnes, and Thomas Dixon were relatively detached citizens who obviously knew facts that would have helped the prosecution's case, but could not bring themselves to incriminate the defendants when sitting in the witness chair facing their belligerent fellow citizens of Hancock County. Yeah, see? Lamborn interrogated them carefully, but without success. It is difficult to blame him for not multiplying his embarrassment by calling other citizens of like mind. Everybody knew. Everybody knew, but no one was willing to take the stand because of mob rule. This is embarrassment. It's an embarrassment and a blight on history that such things happen. Lamborn's difficulties were magnified by the Mormon leaders' refusal to assist in locating witnesses in order to avoid jeopardizing the public peace. If peace was so important to the Mormons that they wouldn't press for convictions, why should the non-Mormons risk their future accord with powerful groups in the county in order to convict men like Thomas C. Sharp, especially when a conviction would almost surely shatter the uneasy peace in Hancock County? Indeed, Lamborn might have wondered, why should the prosecution press harder than it has already? In the world of practical politics, there's limits to the risks one should assume to vindicate the honor of the state. Practicality over principles. Practicality over principles. So here in the footnotes it says, there was insufficient evidence to include Davis in this conspiracy. His refusal to accompany the mob to Carthage to kill a man who was confined in prison established his disavowal of the participation in any of the arrangement, even though Brackenbury testified that he later rushed to the jail, arriving just as the shooting ended, and accompanied the mob back to Warsaw. So, he was in on it, but not directly enough. I'm somehow very skeptical anyone will have been prosecuted. Next chapter is to tranquilize the public mind. This is so frustrating to me. This is so frustrating to me. Because if there were people of pure integrity to be in key spots, justice might be done. But unfortunately, we live in a world that is full of people. Presidents of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints didn't want to come forward to be witnesses because they didn't want to be shot like fish in a barrel. They also kind of had a feeling that with all the mob violence that they've already lived through in Missouri and Ohio, they've seen this rodeo before. They know how the bull works. So, practicality over principle. And if they had to be practical for their lives, because of the mob, and those people who did testify, I'm sure they were ostracized. I would love to understand what would happen to the people afterwards. I don't know if they'll have that. I would love to see what happened to the people of Hancock County. I would have loved to understand what happened to those who are of the mob, especially of these leaders that were indicted. I would have loved to have seen what happened to the witnesses. How persecuted were they? Were they thrown out with the members of the church when the Mormon War in Illinois started? When basically everyone was fleeing as best they could to the Salt Lake Valley, and the stragglers that remained, they just fired cannons on them to get them out. The sick and the elderly. It's disgusting. It's just absolutely disgusting. I would hope that should ever such an event happen with me involved in it, that I would have the moral courage to do things based on principle instead of practicality. I would hope that I would have that. But when everyone is acting out of practicality because of the elephant in the room, mob violence, powerful people with the backing of a mob, and key decisions, including made by the judge in this place, having to bow even insignificantly to these mobs. At the same time, how can you blame them? Who would they get to back them up? Let's say they were dead set on getting the truth. They were dead set on doing the right thing. They were dead set on making sure that the people were convicted who were actually guilty. Who would be able to stand up against the mob? Who? Who would you find without causing civil war? At the same time, at what point is that necessary to sit there and stand up for truth? At what point do you bring in federal marshals who have nothing to do with this? At what point do you bring in an army to sit there and keep the peace and to throw out the citizens that are armed to the teeth, willing to just absolutely destroy credibility of everything that is true? Obviously, well, they didn't have time. They have their circuit courts. They have these problems. Oh, maybe you could call in the state militia. Okay, well, half of them are anti-Mormon anyway. Great. Well, you should call in the Nauvoo Legion. Well, that's going to cause war. The practicality of it was probably beyond the scope of them. The ability to act on principle was out of the scope of what they had. So what's the practicality of it? Everyone acting practically as best they could. The few witnesses who were brave enough to actually say something did. Their personalities would come through with how and what they did. And you get this as a result. I really wish all people could act according to proper principles. But the best way to do it is just flee. Go away. Go to the Rocky Mountains. Go to a place no one wants. Go to a lake that is so salty, no one wants to stay there. Go to a land that is desolate and desert-like and make it bloom like a rose. Could the church have gone on to California, Oregon, Washington? Yeah. Could they have settled there? Yeah. I think it was extremely wise when basically God told Brigham Young, stop in the Rocky Mountains, because then you had no one to fight with other than the Native Americans that were here. And at that point, they were actually mostly on good terms at first. It's just all the different pressures of all the different people settling everywhere that caused things to go wrong with different Indian wars that happened in Utah. And also very different ways of culture. You can see that in the book that I read about stories of faith and courage. And even in my own history, there was an Indian war that was started that Edward Milo Webb Jr., remember, he built a fort that's between Salt Lake City and Cedar City. And at 20 years old, his father died along the Platte River. His father was the blacksmith that helped destroy the printing press that was in Nauvoo. him and his brothers ran the blacksmith shop. Well, he died on the Platte River in Nebraska. Well, his son drove the cattle when he was 5 years old to get to Salt Lake. By the time he was 20, he was running the quarry that helped build the fort. And then later on, he settled in Orderville and was secretary of the Orderville, basically. But he recounts Indian wars that occurred because, for example, there was a native that was beating his wife over something, and one of the pioneers stopped him and beat him, and that later killed him. But how tribalism works is that you get one of us, you get all of us, and so that started an Indian war. So history is just nasty. There's a lot of, you turn over a rock and all the bugs crawl out. It's not fun, it's not nice, but it's real. And despite my agitation over everyone having to act practically instead of on principles, it's disgusting in the utmost. But at the same time, what else are you to do? If you have but few people acting on pure principle, the practicality of it will win out, and the mob will still win. So what's the point? That is a good question. And that is something to think about. What is the point to act morally and on principle, even when everything else says to act otherwise for practicality's purpose? What would be the point in doing that? And should you? Those are kind of separate moral questions, right? The purpose may be to act proper to your principles and convictions to make sure that everything is done according to what is right. The practicality of it may be to never do that. Don't do it. Don't do it at all. Yet at the same time, what's the point if evil still wins? I'm reminded of a movie that was put out by a young 17-year-old man. No, he was 16, in Germany. While the Nazis were rising to power, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who was 16, basically was being a subversive and putting out the news that was outside of Germany in people's mailboxes. He fought against people through information. He printed basically his own newspaper, and how they caught him was he eventually brought on somebody, because he was trying to expand his influence, and he brought on somebody who was more loyal to the party than to his conscience. Or maybe that was his conscience, but he was the youngest person to be executed for being a traitor during that time. He was 16, so there was a movie put out by, I think, Angel Studios about that, or at least church-affiliated kind of production companies. And it's interesting because a lot of the other members, even bishops, were acting in practical ways of, hey, this is what the government is and doing, and we're subject to laws of the governments. They're all acting according to being as lawful as they can and as best they can. And yeah, in some ways it's a stinging retribution against your conscience to go along with things you don't agree with, to just let it be. Where here you have someone who's 16 who is being subversive, and he gets executed. The bad guys win. The bad guys win. But what is the purpose of it then? I think there are people that earn their place when they do what's right, despite everything being against it. And I hope that most people would start to have that courage and live up to that courage in whatever way that they can when bad things are happening. And I hope, more importantly than anything else, that they have the wisdom to see what is right in those circumstances, because when you have dividing lines, it's easy to be on either side of that line. It's easy to sit there and root for your guy, whoever it is, instead of thinking critically, going, is this really what we want? Is this really what we are going to have? Well, as both President Nilsson and now President Oakes has reiterated, I pray God's Spirit will be with you to help you see the truth of things so that you can stand on the side of truth more than one party or side than the other. And more importantly, stand with principle as best you can wherever you're at. And hopefully, as you reflect on this and other things in your life and others' lives, that you will come to stand for what's right. We'll see you.